we appear to be live.
Yay!
That's what I hear, at least. At least that's what the system is telling me. So if you could please just confirm that you can hear us and everything is okay.
Are you out there?
Hello, world. Just make sure that we are all right. We've got audio, yes? That's my main thing, is I don't want to be talking and talking. And then, oh my gosh, and she's got the whole thing. You are live, woohoo. That's 2 weeks in a row. So last week.
Am I going to get fired?
Yeah, last week.
It's a commercial.
At the beginning, you had your laptop going off at the beginning. And now.
Now I have my. Well,
and again?
I know, because it's an ad. They play.
Okay, but. Oh, wow.
Wow.
We're one of those people. Why is this turning on? Okay, so. Welcome, and then there she goes again. That's a new tradition, is every time we start a live stream, Joanna leaves, takes her malfunctioning electronic device, puts it somewhere, and then we'll come back when her malfunctioning electronic device is no longer malfunctioning. So I am glad you're here. Thank you for being here. I hope that you had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend for those of you in the United States. And for everyone else, hope you're having a great week. Today, we are going to be talking about the concept of overfiltration. Now, don't worry. We're not going to be ripping on people who have more than one filter in their tank, or maybe they like a little extra security. So we're going to talk about the concept of overfiltration. We're going to talk about why it's something that we should be talking about and making sure that we aren't wasting a lot of money. So thank you again so much for being here. Joanna is now making her way back. And now she is reappearing. So tell everybody hello.
Hi.
And here we are. So, overfiltration. What is it? Now, I'm going to define it very narrowly as when you're overfiltering a tank, you have more filtration capacity than your tank requires. And so that is really what I'm talking about when I say overfiltration. And we're going to talk about different mechanisms on how that can happen. Now, we have done videos on how much filtration you need. I think at this point we've compared like almost every type of filtration out there. We've done filter reviews. We've done, filtration beginners series. So all of that, or at least most of it, is going to be in the description below. If you want more information or want a condensed version of some of what we're going to be talking about today, that will be there. And then of course, later on, we are going to make sure that we answer your questions. So if you've come with questions, that's a good thing. Again, the reason why I want to talk about it, the reason why I wanted to bring it up is we're getting into the holiday season. And with the holidays, we tend to spend money. And for us crazy fish keepers, I know part of the fun when it comes to fish keeping is like, I know I've got this Turbo 6000 filter on my tank, but I think the new Turbo 7542 is coming out, and that's going to make the tank even better. But it's like $500, and I don't know if that's a wise way to use my money. And so we're going to be talking about this concept of overfiltration because ultimately it impacts your wallet. And so we want to make sure that that's not happening. Now, Super Chat. Thank you so much, Bonnie. Thank you for being here. It's great to see you too. Glad you're here. When we talk about filtration, I want to make sure we understand that there's basically three different types. We've got mechanical filtration, the ability of a filter to pull particulate matter out of the water to make the water appear cleaner. We have biological filtration, which is the ability of surface area in your tank, including your filter, to house microbes that are going to go through the nitrification process. And if you don't know what that is, nitrification just means that you have bacteria that are taking the ammonia that the fish produce and turning that into something called nitrite. NO2 is the chemical formula. Then you have other types of bacteria that take that nitrite and they do something called oxidation, and they oxidize the nitrite into something called nitrate. NO3 is the chemical formula. And so that's the biological side. And then we have the chemical filtration, and that's usually when you add something like, I think I have some examples here. So hold on. I actually brought examples. And I didn't really bring these. These are the only examples I had, so there's nothing special about these. But like, for instance, we have this Marineland ammonia reducing resin. This would be considered chemical filtration. You put this in, hold on, I still have more. props here. So you put that in maybe a filter bag, and you put that in your filter, especially if you've got like an ammonia spike, maybe that will help. We also have this API Nitrosorb. This would be another example of chemical filtration where you're putting media in your filter that's going to help neutralize some of the harmful chemicals. And of course, you've got carbon as yet another example that will sometimes reduce the smell that a fish tank produces. It will remove medications after you're done treating tanks for disease. So that's the chemical side. So when it comes to this concept of overfiltration, in my humble opinion, we all most likely overfilter our fish tanks, our aquariums in this ecosystem when it comes to biological filtration. As an example, I've had plecos that were basically juveniles, maybe 100 to 150 of them in a 20-gallon long growing out. They were still small, an inch or so. This was the only filter that I used, one sponge filter. This is an ATI Hydro 2, I believe. This was it. In a 40-gallon breeder, I had somewhere around 100 or so almost adult bristlenose plecos growing out. And for a while, it was one of these, only a little bit bigger. It was a Hydro 4, so it was slightly wider. But that was the only filter I had. And yet on the biological side, ammonia to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate, never an ammonia spike, never a spike in nitrite. I run 30-gallon totes where the only filtration in that tote, in fact, really the only surface area besides the tote itself is a sponge filter. And I may have 30 Peacock cichlids in that tote, no ammonia, no nitrite spikes. And so when it comes to biological filtration, just about any filter and I have to be clear here, for a well-established tank. I'm not talking about a new tank. I'm not talking about a tank that's like a month old. Like, well, he said just throw this in here and it'll be fine with my 500 cichlids. And you're like, thanks a lot, man. I'm down to 12 cichlids now. In a well-established tank, this is often enough. And the reason that is when it comes to biological filtration, all the surface areas that have access to oxygen and water flow can potentially house the microbes that are necessary to do that nitrification process that we just talked about. So that includes your driftwood, your rocks, your fake or real plants, your caves, the top layers of your substrate where there's still adequate oxygen. And so one of the most important things when it comes to biological filtration is we want to make sure that we have adequate water flow. And so if we have that and the bacteria are getting the oxygen that they need, chances are there's going to be plenty of surface area in your fish tank. And by the way, in my opinion, the biological filtration is by far the most important type of filtration we talk about. If we get that wrong, we have a lot of dead fish. If we get that right, worst case is our tank probably, maybe it doesn't look so great, but it's at least the water is relatively healthy. So biological filtration is definitely the thing. Now, when it comes to chemical filtration, can we overfilter a fish tank? Yeah, we can. I think with the chemical filtration, if you're adding carbon or like the Nitrosorb or something like that, that really depends on your bio load. We don't really use any chemical filtration. I don't think we've ever added it in your tanks. And what I mean by that is the stuff that I've already shown you, or especially carbon. People ask us that all the time. Hey, do we run carbon in our tanks? We don't. I'm not saying if you do that, you've done something wrong or unwise. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's just I haven't found a need to run carbon in a fish tank. Now, some people will run it if they want to remove, like I said, certain smells, or maybe they want to remove some medication after they're done treating a tank. I generally just rely on water changes to remove that medication. Mm-hmm. So we don't really use any of that stuff. I think where the debate can come in is really the mechanical side, the ability of filters to pull the particulate matter out of the water. And so we're talking here about, stuff floating around or cloudy water. That gets annoying. And let's face it, I think most people, when they look at their tanks, for a lot of us, maybe if there's some algae, some of us can live with that. I know I can. I think if you see some of our tanks that I show, there might be algae on the sides of the glass or on the background a little bit or growing on the rocks. We talked about algae as part of our shell dweller tanks in last week's live stream. I don't mind that. I don't like it on the front of the glass, but everywhere else it's fine, at least for me. The issue I think a lot of people have is really what if you've got stuff floating around? What if you've got detritus? Fish are swimming by, maybe you've got sand, and every time they swim by, they kick up a bunch of stuff. I know you particularly are not a big fan of that, right?
No, I'm not a fan at all.
So, you've got some sand, and every time a fast-moving fish goes by, now you've got stuff everywhere. And we've had that problem from time to time. And that's where the additional filtration may come in handy. And so maybe you've got a hang-on back filter or a canister filter or an internal canister filter or even maybe a sump. And it's set up in such a way that you're pulling out that particulate matter. Now, sometimes you've got a filter set up and it's not doing a good enough job. It's not running enough gallons per hour through that filter to adequately get all that stuff out of the water. Now, sometimes it's not just the filter though. Sometimes it's the media that you're using in the filter that can contribute to having cloudy water or stuff floating around in the water. And so one of the things that we do is when we set up, when you look at our fish room, if we've got any type of filter really besides a sponge filter in our fish room, it's there for the mechanical filtration. And so typically what we do in our show and tell is, hold on, I've got to get all of my stuff. Oh, I thought I forgot one of my show and tells. So if it's a hang-on back filter, we might have something like this. So some type of a sponge. It might be like a medium type sponge, maybe coarse sponge, but we'll have this and that will get some of the larger debris out. We'll put that in the hang-on back filter. And then we also use a lot of this, and this is filter floss. It doesn't have to be the blue bonded like you see here, but and there's lots of ways to save on filter floss. We've done a number of videos on that, like how to save money on hang-on back filter media. But generally, this is it. This is what I use in our internal canister filters, and this is also what I use. Hey, look at me. This is also what I use in my hang-on backs, and that's because the hang-on back filters for us are almost exclusively for mechanical filtration. So if you're having a problem from that perspective, then yeah, maybe you might want to add a sponge filter, even though it's not really good at mechanical filtration. Or maybe you're adding, you've got a hang-on back and you want to add a second one, or you want to add an internal canister filter, which can be really good at mechanical filtration. So in that respect, sometimes we add a little bit of extra capacity to get the stuff out of the water. So the other thing to think about too is there's people who just run no filter, like no traditional filter, right? We actually did that in our fish room for quite some time. The 50-gallon molly tank, the lowboy that we have on the one side of the fish room that you see in the background of a lot of our videos, for a very long time, that was running, and I say very long, I mean like maybe 8 months to a year, somewhere in there. I ran an Airstone. There was a full-size canister filter hooked up to that tank. And what I discovered is if I can't just pull the media out with basically no effort whatsoever, I'm probably not going to mess with the filter. And so that's what happened with this canister filter. And it's not just this one. It's happened a few times where I just let the thing run, and pretty soon you'd pick up like the return and there were like just drips coming out. And then I'd get busy. I'd be like, oh, I got to clean that out. But in that tank, I pretty much just had an Airstone, a lot of plants. And as you know, with a 50-gallon lowboy being 4 feet long and 2 feet wide, but only 10 inches tall, there was a lot of surface area there for gas exchange. Never had a problem. No ammonia, no nitrite. Even the nitrates were low because of the plants. The one problem I had on that tank, and the reason why there is a hang-on back filter on there now, was not because of ammonia or nitrite. It was because when you start getting like, I don't even know how many mollies are in that tank at this point. They just keep breeding like crazy. There's probably 50 of them in there, as well as a few other fish. Well, and I'm not kidding you, as soon as those mollies wake up, you turn on the lights, give them like a minute. And what are they doing with the gravel or the sand?
Messing.
Yep, they're picking through the sand, trying to find some goodies. And of course, when they do that, they're spitting stuff out, and then that releases stuff into the water column. And I didn't like the way that looked. And so I added the hang-on back filter strictly to clear that up. I did the same thing on the other lowboy with the multis, with the shell dwellers. I have for years just two, I think they were Hydro 4 sponge filters on that tank. And that was more than adequate to have a 50-gallon lowboy with probably 200 or 300 multis in there. But again, those fish really like to dig up the substrate. And so the problem was I was getting a lot of stuff floating around. And so you'll look at some of the videos and I'm like, oh yeah, there's some stuff floating around that tank. So I put an internal canister filter. I think it was a Cascade. I don't remember what the size is now, but it's actually undersized for the tank. But I was only using it to pull out all that stuff that they were stirring up from the sand, and it's worked out really, really well.
Now, when the lowboy was unfiltered, we did the water changes weekly, right?
Yes, yeah. In all of our tanks, with the exception of some of the more heavily stocked tanks, like I mentioned, hey, we had 100 bristlenose and a 20 long. that required two or three times a week we were changing water. Same thing with our 40-gallon breeder right now that's got, at one point I think it had 100 almost adult bristlenose plecos. I mean, I say almost adult, maybe 3 to 4 inches in size. That tank gets 2 to 3 water changes, and we're going to get to that in a second, and how the filtration and the water change thing, how that relates to one another. So so that's kind of what we do with our filtration. If we have more than one filter on a tank, usually it's because the hang on back or the internal canister filter is just taking care of that extra detritus that's floating around. When it comes to the water changes, and so was that a question that popped up in the chat? Because I haven't yet looked at the chat. Sorry, we'll get there. I promise. If you got questions, we will get there. When it comes to filtration and water changes, and I think this is something that is especially true for people who are maybe newer to the hobby, and maybe people who haven't thought about it a lot. What a lot of people want from their filtration is to reduce the amount of water changes that are occurring on a weekly or biweekly or monthly basis. And so they think, okay, if I add another filter, I'm not going to have to do as many water changes, and I don't like doing water changes, and so I'm going to pack my tank full of filtration. The problem with that is I'm talking just strictly about standard filters. So internal, external canisters with normal, just standard media, the media that we've talked about right now, hang on back, sponge filters, that kind of thing, sumps. If you're just running standard media, there isn't a mechanism to reduce nitrates. So the microbes that we talked about at the beginning are taking your ammonia, which is your fish waste, and converting that to nitrite, which is also something that is bad for your fish, and then converting that nitrite into nitrate. There aren't microbes in sufficient quantities on your standard tank. I know there are other examples. We'll talk about that in a second. But in your standard media, there aren't microbes that are going to be able to reduce the nitrate in a meaningful way. So your filtration, if you're adding it just to do that, in a sense can be a waste. Now, how can you do the nitrate reduction? Well, one is your water changes. All right. So in our pleco tanks, we have a tiny little sponge filter and in the surface area taking care of things. Bonnie, thank you again for the super
Bonnie.
chat. Really appreciate it. We did the water changes. So in our pleco tanks, we might do a 60 to 70% water change 3 times a week because we want to make sure the nitrates are not getting too far over that 20 parts per million that I like as a target, as an upper end. Plants can certainly help reduce nitrates, especially fast-growing plants. And so we did a video not that long ago about how to reduce algae using fast-growing plants. And one of the reasons why you get algae is an imbalance between light and nutrients. And so things like hornwort and guppy grass, even duckweed and salvinia and frogbit, as that stuff grows pretty quick, it will help reduce nitrates. If you have fish that can't have live plants because they eat them or dig them up, things like pothos growing out of the back of your tank or even in the back of your hang-on back filter, let's say, or in a sump with a light, that can help. It's not going to eliminate water changes necessarily, but it's certainly going to reduce the necessity for them, which that can help. Now, some of you are saying, but yes, what about the biomedia that states that it is capable of reducing, or in this case, reducing nitrate and completing the nitrogen cycle? So one, I haven't used it. So you have to understand that what I'm about to say, one is from a science background, right? So for those of you who don't know, I have a master's degree in biotechnology and chemical science. I am a professor of microbiology. And I've taught parasitology, virology, pretty much most of the ologies, general zoology.
Science nerd.
Yeah, I'm a science nerd. I like it. The issue with that media, in my opinion, is there's a couple things. For every person that says it works, you have a person that says it didn't work. So I think, and that's just from talking with people. The other issue is you have to understand that what we're doing in an ecosystem such as an aquarium is we are packing a lot more life per cubic inch or cubic meter, whatever you want to call it, cubic centimeter, than what we would normally find in nature. And so we have a lot more organisms in a closed system producing a lot more waste in that volume of water than what would normally happen in nature. And so therefore, to compensate for that and to get really good nitrate reduction, right, to eliminate the nitrate, you're going to need a lot of media. You're going to need a lot of anaerobic volume in your filters to deal with that nitrate. Now, some people do that. Some people are like, oh, that's fine. I'll run an extra canister filter and set it up with that biomedia that's going to help reduce the nitrate. Maybe I'll run an extra hang-on back, although that doesn't work as well. What do we got? Jared?
Jared, thank
Thank
you,
you so
Jared.
much. Does phosphate filter media do anything special, or is it just marketing? I haven't used it. And so I don't like to give a definitive answer unless I've tested something for, I guess that's the science in me too, is I really want to test it in multiple different ways before I can comment in a way that is going to be valuable to you. So, and I don't know a lot of people who do use it. So that's the other issue.
Thank you, Nick.
Nick, yeah, love the info. Thank you for everything you do. We are privileged to have someone as qualified to bring us this information. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, when it comes to nitrate reduction, there is specialized media out there. It can be costly. It can take up a lot of space. And so sometimes for us, it's just easier to do the water changes and manage the nitrate in that way. So I think the last thing before we really get into the questions is the other thing you want to think about too when it comes to adding additional filtration. This is something that you deal with, especially with me, is what do you do with the aquascapes? Right? So
Marvel should come up with some invisible filtration.
Marvel, huh?
Yeah,
you just went right to
like,
make believe.
Yeah, with the
not like a legit aquatics company. You want Marvel to do this.
We're going to like the Quinjet, just total cloaking.
Okay.
Yeah, because never fails. Every single scape that I do is with the intent of hiding all of the mechanics. And every single time I forget, I do my scape and I say, dang it.
Especially with mine, there's nothing funnier. So I showed you this, right? This was the sponge filter. This is a Hydro 2. So it's not, it's not very huge or anything like that, right? Here's the palm of my hand. Here you go. But in some of these scapes that she does, like especially the 40-gallon breeders and the 4-foot-long tanks, she's like, okay, after she starts setting it up, she's like, okay, what about your filtration? And I bust out these big Hydro 4s or 5s that are easily the size of my hand. They're like, twice the circumference of this thing almost. And she's like, oh, great. I got to move a bunch of rocks. And it gets really tough to hide that stuff. So, Regina, thank you so much for being a primetime partner. Yay. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Regina.
You'll have a video out that you'll get to see tomorrow. So, so that is basically filtration and overfiltration. So is it wrong? Is it a horrible thing? No, I did see a question. And that question was, what about too much oxygen, or I think the other thing would be too much water flow. So when it comes to overfiltration, the downsides. First of all, your microbes are only going to grow to the waste, the food that's available to them. So if you've got a very lightly stocked tank or moderately stocked tank, and you've got a filter that is sufficient, that's got sufficient area, surface area, which if it's housing, whether that's biomedia or whatever, ceramic rings, chances are it's going to be more than sufficient for that surface area. But the issues that we start to see is, one, obviously the cost, right? So you're buying equipment that maybe you could spend somewhere else on another tank, or a different light, or
some more rocks,
or some
stuff.
Crazy fish you've always wanted. So there's the cost. The other thing is the flow. And so that's the other thing to consider, is how much flow do you have going into the tank, and what types of fish do you have? So if you've got a betta, or you've got guppies, or maybe angelfish, or sebrums, these are fish, or discus, these are fish that really don't want to be blown around a tank. So anytime you've got like a round fish that's not very hydrodynamic, chances are that wave maker that's blowing out like 600 gallons per hour in its face might not be the best thing. If you see your guppies or bettas just really struggling, or they're out to one side of the tank and they're just hiding all the time,
panting,
and you've got like really strong water flow, that can be an issue when it comes to overfiltration. In terms of additional oxygen, most filters are not going to, I haven't seen that really as an issue, right? So if you're talking about your standard canisters, hang-on backs, sponge filters, and they're functioning properly, the idea that there could be too much oxygen in the water, probably not, because a lot of that's going to gas off. Even sponge filters and air stones for that matter, if you've got those large bubbles, it's not really introducing a lot of oxygen into the water column, because those bubbles, unless they break in the water, are not releasing oxygen. When they release the oxygen, it's towards the top. And so what really the benefit in terms of the sponge filter and even the air stones that are releasing the larger bubbles is the surface agitation. And that surface agitation will induce more gas exchange. And so CO2 out, oxygen is well distributed throughout the tank, but it's not necessarily in most cases the bubbles that are occurring. In fact, the best way to increase oxygen in a tank, and this is something that we studied. I also did a master cert in aquaculture and fish health, and some of the really interesting filters when it came to fish that needed a lot of oxygen, or maybe like for fish farming and they're normally in a river system and now they don't have a flow through system, is they will have filters that actually almost run down like a waterfall. So like when you have your ponds and you've got a pump that's pumping up to the top and all that water is hitting the rocks and then it's going into the pond, that's actually really good for oxygenating the water. And so when you can replicate that in a tank, that's the best way to get the oxygen in. It's not really the air stones or the sponge filters, in my opinion. It's those, and that's kind of, it's an advantage where you have that water that's just running basically in open air over a surface, and then it eventually gets into your tank. So, yeah, all right, let's, Mark Hill, how do you become a member? So I think at some point there was a link in the live chat, and then if you go to any video, especially if you look in the descriptions of any video, there is a link there as well. So, and look at that, there it pops up. So, all right.
I'm looking for, Sarah, you brought up a good point. She wishes that we could grow plants from the sponge filters, and then you wouldn't see them. That would be
so. That brings
really
up an interesting
cool
point. Growing plants from the sponge filters, and it actually reminds me of a couple things. I've had plants grow in sponge filters because the roots just start growing in them.
Well, and I know a lot of the mosses really
well,
like to.
The issue with that would be once you clog up that sponge filter with the roots, you reduce the flow of the water. Remember, these microbes, they need oxygen. They're aerobic just like we are, so they need oxygen for their metabolism. The more clogged filter media gets, the less capable your microbes are of actually doing that nitrification process. So one of the things, and I was going to mention this and then I forgot, when it comes to not only choosing the right filter media to, especially for mechanical filtration, you really want to make sure that your media is not all gunked up. If you've got a sponge filter, we clean our sponge filters once a week, and we do something that I know is very controversial. We clean them in tap water, like chlorinated, just regular tap water out of the sink, because it's only going in that sink because we clean them every week. We can get everything out of that thing in like 30 seconds and right back in the tank. So the exposure time to the chlorine is minimal, and it doesn't really do anything harmful to our balance, our system. But once your sponge filters get clogged, two things happen. One, you get reduced oxygen, and so that's going to harm the nitrifying bacteria. But the other interesting thing is, and this is something we talked about in that aquaculture and fish health program a lot, is microbes that are doing nitrification, Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas, they attach to surfaces, and then they form a biofilm. But they attach to these surfaces, and once you get detritus or fish waste or dead plant material over the surface of that bacteria, it suffocates. It would be like putting a blanket or 10 blankets over your face and be like, okay, this is how you have to live. Good luck, right? So when it comes to sponge filters, when it comes to your ceramic rings and things, if that stuff is really coated in fish waste and detritus, that's when you can have problems with your biological filtration. All right. Now, granted that those microbes will then probably compensate on the surfaces of your fish tank, but you want to be careful there. I'm not saying you have to clean that stuff, the biological filtration every single week, but you do want to keep an eye on it and make sure it's not completely gummed up. And this is the same thing with your filter floss and your sponges. So if you've got a hang-on back filter and you're relying on that, or a canister filter or an internal canister filter to get some of the gunk out of your water, well, once your filter floss is gummed up, once that sponge is saturated, it's not going to hold anything else. One of the things so my boys maintain our tanks. And one of the things...
Not mine.
Well, not yours. Yeah, you do your own. But
I do mine.
The rest of the fish room, they maintain the tank. So if they look good or you like the way they look, that's them. That's not really me. I have other roles in the fish room, but maintenance is usually not one of them unless they get behind and need some help. But one of the things that we see right away is if they forgot to do a hang-on back filter, which means they forgot to replace the filter floss and clean out the sponges, the water will look visibly murkier within like 4 or 5 days. So we know it right away, like, oh, we missed that hang on back. Let's go ahead and change out that media. So if you're having those issues, make sure that you're keeping up with your media maintenance, filter maintenance, and that will help a lot, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So what other questions do we have? I saw something and I wanted to address it. I don't remember who asked it. What do I think about, I think it was like the K1 media and maybe like the Zis sort of filters. I thought I saw it maybe in 2 different questions. So Mark Hill, welcome to Primetime Partners. Thank you so much for being here. So for me, I haven't found it because I feel strongly that the tank itself, as long as it's got adequate water flow and the filtration you already have, I haven't found a need to run, like you see these DIYs where people put the biomedia in a 2-liter bottle and they bubble that through. So I haven't found a need for it because I've never had an ammonia or nitrite spike because I didn't have enough filtration. The only time that's ever happened is way back in the day when we would set up a tank, maybe and didn't have filter media on hand, or maybe we added one too many fish. But for the most part, I don't generally think it's necessary. Even without sponge filters, and most of you know, in almost every single tank that we run, we have sponge filters. But if I were to take those out and just run a hang-on back filter in a well-established tank, I'm not talking about a tank that is recently set up, I just run sponge and filter floss, and then the filter floss gets changed out every week. The sponge usually gets rinsed out very, very quickly, and back in the filter it goes, and that's how I roll with it. So there's certainly nothing wrong with having the ceramic rings or that media in there that will increase surface area. That's fine. You just want to make sure that stuff is placed after your sponges and your floss, because what you don't want is that getting gummed up, right? You don't want it filled with fish waste, because then it defeats the purpose. So you want the sponge, you want the filter floss to catch all that icky. That's right.
Icky?
Catch all that icky fish stuff before. That's my word. It's my word for the night.
Sure.
You want the filter floss to catch the icky.
I don't think you're going to see that on a package anytime.
It is. That's going to be our new t-shirt.
Woohoo.
I take care of the icky. All right.
And Jimmy Cortez, I'm totally looking forward to the new Nano wall too.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to it. What I'm not looking. So one of my least favorite things to do when it comes to the fish room is building stands. And I built it with I think at this point.
You wouldn't know it because you have built so many of them.
Well, that's just it. The only stand I haven't built in our fish room is the 150, and it's still on that. And it scares me. It's on that PetSmart, like the particle board stand. And I remember the first time I filled that tank up, I'm like, this is just going to collapse on the ground. How is this possibly going to hold 1,500 pounds? And I'm filling this thing, and maybe some of you can relate when you get a new tank, especially it's like your first larger tank, like a 55 or larger, and you've got this stand that just kind of came with it, especially like I said, those 125 or 150 PetSmart stands. And I don't know how those things do it. I don't. You look at them, they're like stapled together, and they're like, what is it? Like maybe not even an inch thick, and you're like, and then the back is all open, the front's all open. You just got the 2 little center pieces, and you're like,
scary.
Wow, that's gonna hold this thing, huh? And you're like, you slap that water, and as the tank is filling, you're like, you hear all the creaks as things are settling. Like, oh my gosh, is this thing gonna collapse? Am I gonna have 100 gallons of water on the floor? And here we are. We've had that tank for I don't know how many years, 12 years, and remarkably that stand is still going, still doing what a stand does. So
lots of buckets.
Finn, thank you so much for being here. And
welcome.
Marty,
wait, I want to see it. Welcome, Finn Wiggles.
That's
such a
cool.
Great name.
It is a great
name.
Make
a great bumper sticker or a shirt.
And Marty, thank you so much for the super chat.
Thanks, Marty.
Appreciate
Hi.
it.
Go dollar store.
So I don't remember how. Oh, so anyway, the point is I've got to get this stand built for a Nano wall because that's what I promised, because we're going to make some changes as we mentioned in the video. And now I've got to, then I get sawdust all over the garage. So it's going to be a real mess. And
that's true.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So Candace's Aquatics. Let's see. What do we got here? Is it possible to breed a king?
Cadence Aquatics.
I can't
How did I know?
see.
I just knew you were pronouncing that wrong. We're going to get you to
sorry,
Costco.
Cadence.
We're going to take him. He
I
likes
don't
Costco. He's
need-
afraid to get glasses.
I'm not kidding. I don't
I'm gonna
need
take him to
glasses.
Costco
My
and-
eyes have always been perfectly fine. So clearly they are now too. Is it possible to breed a king male betta with a regular female? If I can't, can I breed a Dumbo female and a regular male? Will any of the fry be Dumbos? So the kings, I've heard a couple different origin stories about them. They tend to be basically the larger traditional bettas that they kept back for fighting and stuff. Will they breed? So first of all, I haven't bred them, so I'm not speaking from experience. So I always want to make sure when I'm saying something that that's either from experience or from conjecture, and you take that the way you want. Will the king male and the female breed? I don't see why not. At least genetically, I don't see why not. Now, I don't know about the behavior. And the other one, will the regular and the Dumbo breed? Absolutely, they will. Will you get Dumbo fry? I don't know what type of gene that is. I know with our guppies, we have Dumbo ear guppies. And even with the Dumbo females and the males, that particular trait is not very stable. So I don't know how it is in bettas. If someone is a better betta breeder than me and more experienced, certainly chime in and answer that question. But I know that the Dumbo ears in guppies that is a one you have to constantly be selecting for because it goes away pretty fast.
I would think, yeah.
Yeah, within a generation or two, you start getting more non-Dumbos than Dumbos.
Thanks, D-Max.
Daniel, can I put 6 cribs and 3 rams in a 40 breeder? Size-wise, yes, I think you can. The issue is going to be how do they do with one another? And that's always a wild card, right? When you're dealing with cichlids, I always say when you're trying to mix cichlids, oh, and by the way, thank you, D-Max, for the super chat. With the cribs, I think the 6 cribs are fine. I've kept that number of cribs in, I think it was a 20 long, and had a group a pair that started to pair up, and then I had to move the rest out. But before that happened, they were fine. I think as they become adults, you're going to have lots of line of sight blocks. The issue is going to be how do the rams do with them, because both the cribs and the rams are going to like that bottom third of the tank. And if they start to pair up, that's always the thing, right? Whenever you're thinking about, okay, can I keep this cichlid and this cichlid together, especially the smaller South American cichlids, the answer is it often will work at first. The question is what happens when you get a breeding pair in a 40-gallon breeder and you've only got 36 inches long and 18.5 inches deep, and now they're trying to protect fry, and they're pushing not only all the cribs off, but the rams, and then all of a sudden maybe you've got a ram pair and a crib pair, and they're breeding on different sides of the tank. Undoubtedly, if you've got 6 cribs and you get a breeding pair, those other cribs are probably going to pick off the fry and any other fish. So if you're interested in breeding, it's better just to go with a pair. And you'll have to kind of see what happens as they mature. Okay, what else we got?
Welcome, Paul.
Hardy.
Paul's
water.
a new member.
Paul, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it. I'm missing this stuff. D-Max, thank you once again. Great seeing you guys making the live streams, a weekly thing. Yeah, we're trying. You know, it was one of those things, and I do want to address that too before we get into the other questions. Is a lot of people ask, hey, there's some other live streams going on at this time. I know that, and it's not like I'm trying to step on anybody's toes. It was just we wanted to do this, and it's part of the community that I really wanted to enhance. The problem was we're still really busy with the boys. They've got things going on Tuesdays, Thursdays. Our weekends are shot. We can't commit Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So that left like Monday and Wednesday. It was like, well, Mondays get a little shaky with some things. So it was like, we really had to narrow it down to this day and this time.
Wednesdays.
Yeah, it was like Wednesdays. Well, and then once, right now it's easy because with my job as a professor, I'm still teaching online. And I know I'm going to be doing that through the spring. Once the summer and the fall hits in 2021, if I'm back in class, then I know even trying to make an earlier live stream, it's just like, this was the day and the time that worked. So, but thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Okay. What do we got?
Top plants for filtration. Let's see. Michael wanted to know.
Top plants for filtration.
Hornwort.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. I'm assuming when we're talking about filtration, we are mostly talking about nitrate. And by the way, every once in a while, I have somebody comment who's also in the sciences, and they will say, hey, you know what? And this is absolutely true. Aquatic plants actually prefer ammonia and nitrite and not nitrate. So they actually prefer those things. The issue is because if you have a well-established tank with the nitrifying bacteria, they often outcompete the plants for the ammonia and the nitrite, and then the plants can still use the nitrate, so that's what they rely upon. So when it comes to that, I love the fast-growing ones. I love plants that are not root feeders. So if your goal is to reduce nitrate, right? So we're talking about water quality. I tend to stay away from things like sword plants and crypts that are going to grow more extensive roots. I like floating plants like hornwort. These are things we already mentioned. So hornwort, guppy grass, salvinia, frogbit, even duckweed can help. Some of the stem plants can be really good. So water sprite, water wisteria, and I saw a question somewhere in here about water wisteria. That's a really good one. Those plants, now the thing is, they grow really fast. Mm-hmm. Because of that, you do have to kind of consider, okay, once they use up the nutrients in the water, I'm going to have to add some liquid fertilizers. And so maybe you add some Easy Green or something like that. And you get the nitrates back in there and you get some of the phosphates back in there and some of the trace minerals that these plants need. Because in our experience, and maybe some of you experience this as well, water Sprite and water wisteria for us, the minute we put it in the tank, it's like, whoo, and you get this huge, it looks like a tropical forest in your fish tank. You're like, wow, this is super cool. In some of the early videos where I had a lot of it, you see some of these tanks like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And then like 2 weeks later, because if I fall back on the fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, it's like, huh, it all grew really fast, and now I've got to siphon out all this dead stuff down here. So you do have to, and guppy grass is the worst with that for us too. It'll grow to the point where it'll like take light away from all the plants that are further down, and then all of a sudden it gets all these needles everywhere. Hornwort does the same thing. So fast growing, floating stem plants, but then just make sure that you keep up with the fertilizers. Logical thinker 101. Did I say that right? If I mess things up, I'm sorry. It's not like I'm trying to be disrespectful. It's just because I can kind of sort of see.
Do you think we look really weird? Like,
oh, I'm sure we do. Yeah, we look like a couple of elderly people. Not there's anything wrong with that. I use pothos for filtration out of the water grower, but it grows very fast and pulls a boatload of nitrates out. Currently have 3 planted hang-on backs and an overhead planted sump. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Yeah, I agree with you. The pothos are fantastic. Obviously, if there's any challenge to pothos, and I think you mentioned, is you have to have lighting for them. And so for us, for the most part, in most of our tanks where we grow the pothos, the tank light itself is sufficient. And the roots, so the idea is you just cut a stem of pothos out. Is that what you call it? You're the gardener. Stem of pothos? Is that what you call it? Just cut one of the stems, right? And just chuck it in the water.
I don't even know what you said. The pothos plant. Are you saying you're taking a cutting of a pothos?
Yeah, stem of it. I'm not a botanist.
You made like a phrase.
Microbiology, not a botanist. I'm not. I don't teach about plants.
Take a cutting of pothos.
I take a cutting of pothos, and then you take the stem, and you put it in the water, and then usually after about 3 or 4 weeks, it starts to grow little roots. And I've actually had, if you go back, when we had the electric blue car, maybe before that, we had a 40-gallon breeder, and the pothos roots were growing. It looked really cool because for some reason it was doing like exactly what you'd hope it would do. It grew all along the back and along the sides, and it kind of looked like an underwater South American sort of feel. And yeah, it sucks out all kinds of nitrates, and it used the light. And then what's really cool, if you let it go, it starts to grow up, it will attach to the wall. It was growing up the wall. It was growing up the stands. Pretty soon it was getting light from the tanks above it. It was awesome. And then it died. So yeah. All right. Let's see here. Hello. All right. So hold on. Carla. Hello, everyone. Like what you're seeing and hearing, please be sure to hit the... Oh, thank you. Hit the like button. Yeah, sure. That's
hold
great.
On. Let me hit the like button.
Don't,
I haven't decided yet.
Hit the like button in your own thing.
I haven't decided yet.
Hardy, good question. What leads you to decide water needs to be changed? And so I use nitrate as my guide. And we actually did a video like water changes 101, how often you need to change it. And in that video, the short version is, the Cliff Notes version is, nitrate determines how much water I change and how frequently. So when I said, for instance, like the pleco tanks that were pretty overstocked, now we sell those plecos at local swaps and auctions, so they don't stay that way. I want to be clear about that. But when they are a little bit overstocked, I am trying to gauge when are my nitrates getting elevated. So for us, my goal is that I don't like to see them over 20 parts per million in non-planted tanks especially. I'll let it go that high for the planted tanks, 20, 25 parts per million. But then I want to do a water change and bring the percentage of water that I change is enough so that the next time I change water, I haven't gone over that 20 parts per million. Now that kind of indicates, oh, you must be testing your water all the time. No. Once I know, as long as I haven't changed my bioload and I haven't had a bunch of plants die or something like that, you can kind of gauge that in an established tank after about 3 or 4 weeks and be like, oh, okay. So my nitrates were 20 parts per million when I did the water change. I did let's say a 30% water change, and the next week, the same day, it was right around 20 again. So then okay, 30% per week is enough to keep my nitrates about where they need to be. For some really lightly stocked tanks that are heavily planted, maybe that's not the case. Maybe like, oh, I can do 10% every couple of weeks and it's fine. I would prefer to do smaller water changes more frequently than really large water changes less frequently. So I think, and I know you've kind of take into that too with your wall, correct?
Well, yeah, especially with the smaller tanks.
Smaller tanks especially, yeah. So, and I know people who have actually success doing 80% water changes 1 or 2 times a week because they kind of have to with their stocking levels. But if I have a choice between, okay, I can do a 40% water change once a week or 2 20%, I'd probably rather do the 2 20s. Obviously, you've got to balance your time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, do I really want to drag out the Python hose and all this stuff or buckets and doing that twice a week? It's up to you, what you feel comfortable with.
Fish Nerd is in the house here. Hey, Carlos.
Cool. Very awesome. Hello. Glad you're here. I hope the baby's doing well. Every once in a while, I see a little Instagram. And she's getting a little bigger every single time.
I hope you guys are squeezing in some sleep here.
Such a stressful time when they're young. And that's like the weirdest thing, too. And then we're going to get right back on the fish. But the first time they hand you like a kid.
Yeah.
And you're like,
here you go.
And like the first couple days in the hospital, like they're helping you take care of it. And I was like, okay, bye. And you're like, what do you mean bye? There should be some kind of a transitionary period. Can't we just leave the kid here for like a day or two and just kind of practice before we just give it to us? I mean, this is a person. You just expect us. We've never had a person before. You think fish are hard. You come home with a person. You're like, all right, well, what do we do with it now? It's crying. I don't know. Try to give it some food. Did it poop? Derek, hold on. Now I want to get to a question. Now that I got that off my chest.
Okay, now.
Hey guys, I love the channel. One question for you. What plants do you think would survive in a Peacock hap tank having issues with nitrates and have been having to do 70% water changes every other day? Wow. So yeah, that's kind of the thing, right? When you've got some African cichlids like Mbuna or peacocks, they do really well when you've got a heavily stocked tank to reduce the aggression. We have that in our 75 gallon and our 125, 275 gallons, one Peacock, one Mbuna tank. Mm-hmm. And I have the same issue as you do. And so far, I wish I had better news for you. I can't recall any plants that I've put in the tank that they left alone. I think the plant that lasts the longest is the hornwort in the Peacock tanks. In Mbuna tanks, they shred that stuff down to a stem right away. But the hornwort lasts sometimes. And I've heard people like, oh no, I had okay luck with Anubias or maybe even some Java fern. I haven't had that luck. Maybe I'm just unlucky and my fish decide that they're just going to eat it all. But that's one where you might want to consider the pothos thing, right? Where you grow that outside of the tank if you can and just put the roots in. But I've even found that some, I don't know what's going on, but some, especially my Mbuna, they won't leave the roots alone. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if they're necessarily eating the roots, but they're chewing on it. And I can't grow pothos in my Mbuna tanks either. Peacock tanks I can. And in fact, it's one of my best pothos tanks is my Peacock. So you could try that. All right, let's see here. What else we got? Just looking for some things. Now the chat's moving. Pawtucket Patriot. Hi, getting back into the hobby and I'm setting up an Epistle Borellii pair in a 20 high. Do you think CPDs would be a nice midwater fish I plan to heavily plant? First of all, the Borellii are awesome. I love those fish. We've had them before. Very cool. They get some really nice blue and yellow color. So I think you're going to be really happy with them. A 20 high is a great tank for a pair. I think your CPDs especially, I think they might be too small. There's a good chance they may leave them alone. But I would probably want something just a little bit larger. So maybe about the size of like an Ember Tetra or a Neon, that size. It doesn't have to be those specific fish, but I might go just a little bit larger just so that those CPDs are so cool and they're so pretty. Oh, yeah. And for a small fish, they can sometimes cost a decent amount of money. And the last thing you want is to put those in, and then when the Borellii get larger, or they start to breed, and now they get more protective, and those CPDs start getting a little bit closer. Not that they necessarily will eat the fry, but I worry a little bit about the size of those fish. Mm-hmm. Multi-tank addiction. How you doing, man? Mm-hmm. It's been a while since we've seen you. Hopefully, we'll see you at a fish event sometime in 2021. Can you recommend a native South American plant? I'm really not. I'm so bad, to be honest, with like the plant species and stuff. I know, like when I look at them, I'm like, okay, that's a crypt, that's a sword, that's an Anubias, that's whatever. Yeah. But I don't, even with the crypts, like individual species, I'm not really sure. So I don't know. I wish I had a better answer for you. But again, I don't like to try to answer questions unless I have significant experience. But again, y'all in the live chat, if you've got a pretty sweet South American plant that you can recommend to multi-tank addiction, go ahead and start recommending the heck out of it, because I don't know. All right, let's see here. Carlos, if you have a 3D background, you can stick pothos in there and in there or in the hang on. Yeah, definitely the 3D backgrounds, at least for some of them. Like for ours, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but there's a top cover to them, so the fish can't jump back there. So that usually prevents that from happening. But if you have an open part in the 3D background, for sure. All right, let's see here.
Carlos said that most swords are native South American.
Okay, yeah. Let's see here. Oh, SP, can a Bolivian ram hold off an electric blue acara, or will the acara not let the ram have its territory? So that depends. So Bolivian ram, electric blue acara. The nice thing is, at least in terms of cichlids, they're both usually relatively mellow. And I say that, and then I always hear horror stories like, yeah, thanks, man. My electric blue acara is like the most aggressive thing I've ever had, or the no joke. This no joke, man. They used to say that back in the 80s, right? No joke.
Really?
Yeah. You got to get back with your 80s lingo. I had a Bolivian ram in a 75 gallon. Full grown, so pretty. Had the pink underbelly. It was such a pretty fish, and is always just showing off his fins as Bolivian rams do. I am not kidding you. I had a heckelei in that tank. Acarithes heckelei, which is kind of like a geophagus, and the thing was probably 7 inches long. It was a big fish. And that Bolivian ram never took a bite out of the heckelei, didn't fin it, but would chase that fish all around the tank. It just, I don't know. He's like, you're a lot larger than me, but you look like me, and I'm jealous, and I don't like that. So you're going to sit over here in 1/3 of the 75 gallon. I've got the rest of the tank. So will the two get along? It depends on the individual fish. It depends on the size of the tank too. You know, if we're talking about a 75 gallon, then there's a 4-foot tank, I should say. There's going to be a much better likelihood of that happening than maybe I've got these fish in a 20 long right now. So size of the tank really is going to matter. The line of sight, the types of environments they have. Do each fish have an area where they can kind of have a little, rock / driftwood / planted area where they're not necessarily going to always see the other fish, but they're two less aggressive fish. So that's a good thing.
All right. Mark Hill is asking sand or gravel, which is better. If you're asking me, I'm going to say sand, just because I like it better. But
yeah, sand or gravel, huh?
But depends.
Age-old debate.
Depends.
Let's start a fight.
Right?
I say gravel. I'm a gravel man. No, I honestly, I think it just depends on what you want. I've heard, you hear these stories like, oh, you can't grow plants in gravel. Oh, you can't grow plants on sand. It's like, well, what other options are there? Like when you look at nature, are they all just growing in cement or something down there? No, they're all in dirt.
Aqua soil.
So yeah.
So yeah, that would be the third one.
Gravel, sand, there's advantages and disadvantages. One of my older videos I did was like how to choose the right substrate or something, and I went over all these different substrates. But some of it depends on. When it comes to substrate, I really try to set up the tank based on the fish I know that are going to be in there. So for instance, if I know that I've got multis, like we talked about last week with the shell dwellers, well, I'm definitely going to put sand in that tank. I try to put sand in my geophagus tanks. If I have larger South American cichlids that I know are just going to dig everything up anyway, and I want a substrate in there, maybe I'm just going to do gravel because it's easier to gravel back, or they're going to be dirty, so that's going to be easier to take care of. In terms of plants, I haven't seen a difference, at least not in the general beginner plants. So I'm talking about cribs, Java ferns, sword plants, even Anubias, once it grows in, when the roots actually grow into the substrate, I don't notice a difference. I mean, I don't know if you notice a difference in growth patterns.
No. If you're a scaper and you want to, if you are using the planted plants, you may develop a preference like I do, which one is easier for you to kind of maneuver the roots into the substrate. I prefer sand, but it can, some people don't like that, so.
I saw a comment and then it went by, and now I can't find it. It says snails can tell you a lot about water quality, something like that. That is absolutely true. I have absolutely found that to be true. That was a really good little piece of advice there. Mystery snails, even like your pond snails, sorry, little cough there. They can tell you a lot about your water quality. If you see your snails are constantly at the top of the water and they don't generally come down, that not always, but at least for us, often indicates there's something wrong with the water. Maybe especially in our mystery snail breeding tanks, if we had 1 or 2 die, and it's a little bit harder to see when you've got 100 of them in a tank, it's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I need to check that water. Or if there's high nitrates, or if you do have an ammonia or nitrite spike, sometimes you'll see those snails shoot to the top of the tank, and if they're staying there, you might want to check your water. Okay. Sean asks, any tank mates recommendations for a Fajaka puffer? I've never had one. And so again, with that kind of thing, I don't want to tell you something and be like, yeah, man, that puffer I have ate all your suggestions. Thanks a lot. So I don't know. I've never had the only puffers that we've had were the pea puffers.
Puffers.
We could tell you all about those, but like the bigger ones, I haven't kept them. Bonnie, again, my goodness, thank you so much.
Oh, you like the shirt? Thanks,
that's
Bonnie.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yay.
So thank you so much. Let's see here. What else we got? Yikes, Sora. Do you recommend hornwort or guppy grass for mollies? Hornwort or guppy grass? If your goal is to protect the fry, to me, that's almost a personal preference thing. So I tend to like the hornwort a little bit more than guppy grass, just generally speaking. And mostly it's because if I want to remove it, it's all connected. So you just stick your hand in there, and as you start pulling out, it's like, oh my gosh, it's a never-ending clump of hornwort. And then you can just literally just rip it off and then just throw the rest in that you want. Or the guppy grass, especially if it starts to die back, you've got all this, and the hornwort does that too, it makes a mess. But I've just found it's a little bit easier to maintain my tanks with the hornwort compared to the guppy grass. But you might like the guppy grass more, so it's not like a major difference between the two.
All right, I think I saw a question. Have you noticed Oscars changing colors?
Absolutely. Oscars
did,
yeah.
They?
So Danny, yeah. I've had Oscars many times throughout my life, and I noticed that especially when you're keeping more than one, they can be very moody fish. When we did that video about like the fish with the best personalities, Oscars are just ridiculously silly. They are one of the closest fish, that and like the Midas cichlid we had, the male, where they recognize you. Oscars will throw a fit. They will throw fits, and yes, their colors will change. I will find sometimes my Oscar's just sitting there at the bottom of the tank, and I don't know if he's sleeping or whatever he's doing, and he'll look a little pale. And you're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with him? I might start testing water and everything. Everything's fine. And then I've learned that no, he's in a mood. And then if he's feeling more dominant, we have the Oscar that we have right now is a red Oscar, so you'll see a lot more orange in him sometimes. It's not super drastic, not as drastic as some of the African cichlids can be. But yeah, they'll change colors slightly, but not like, oh, I've got a red Oscar that turned into a lemon or something like that. I saw something about Demasoni cichlid.
Hi,
hold on.
Joseph.
Hardeep. Hello, Joseph. How do Demasoni do with yellow labs and red zebras? So we're talking about Mbuna cichlids. So for those of you who don't know, the Demasoni, in my opinion, are probably one of the, certainly top 10, maybe top 5 meanest Mbuna out there. They really are aggressive fish. If it were me and I were keeping red zebras and yellow labs, my best advice to you is stay away from the Demasoni and go with Pseudotropheus solosi. We did a species profile on them. The males have very similar colors. The females will stay like a yellowish color, but the males get that blue with the dark blue. And they are a much, much easier fish to deal with in terms of aggression. And so right now, we've got them in our 75-gallon mixed Mbuna community tank. We also have them with a group of rusty cichlids, which are also very mellow. But your yellow labs so the Demasoni are really rough on potentially yellow labs. Aratus can be very rough. Bumblebee cichlids can be a pretty rough fish. Kenii are that borderline as well. So I would go with the solosi before I would do Demasoni, just because I've seen entire. I saw a guy one time at GCCA, Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. It's one of the fish clubs we belong to. I'm not kidding you. He bought a bag. It was a huge bag of Demasoni cichlids at one of these. I don't remember if it was a meeting or if it was a swap. He bought this bag of like 40 Demasoni, and he was going to stick them in like a 75-gallon. And I asked him the next month, I'm like, hey, how are the Demasoni doing? He had like 4 left. They wiped each other out, like almost completely destroyed each other. The only time I've ever had that happen was I had zebra obliquitans, which is a Lake Victorian, where I had like 10 of them. And then within like 3 weeks, I was down to 2. I'm like, my gosh, these things. And it was like, they're fine. And then they come down the next morning like, oh, wow, they're just literally wiping each other out. So most of the time that doesn't happen, but the Demasoni can be a real handful. Okay. Joseph H. I had a 40-gallon. The top brace broke. I got the tank practically for free 12 years ago, so I retired it and just finished setting up a 55. Lots of work. Consolidated some tanks. Yeah, when those braces break, the best advice I can give you is get the water out right away. Usually, especially like with the 55 gallons, if there is a tank with a center brace and that thing has snapped, that center brace is there to keep the front panel and the back panel where they're supposed to be. And you might not notice it at first, but when that brace completely cracks, if you look right along the edge of that tank, you'll see that front panel starting to bow out. And that is one scary thing if that panel blows. I've had buddies fix it. They've actually melted the center brace back together. I don't know exactly how they did it, but I've got handy friends who can do that kind of thing. So, but yeah, watch out for those center braces because they can cause a lot of problems. Jamie, Psilocybe are my favorite cichlid. Had so much fun breeding them. Yes, I do too. And they are very prolific breeders. I have, like I said, in the 55 gallon, we had them in a 40. I moved them to the 55. I'm sitting on 2 different groups of fry right now that are 2 different ages. I'm just waiting for the swaps and auctions to open back up so we can start moving them again. But they're great fish, absolutely. All right, Noah, I'm planning a 75 gallon build, thinking yellow labs and rusties. Thought about 1 Geophagus, I think it's supposed to be Tapajos. Sounds like an okay mix. How many labs and rusties would you recommend? Okay. First, you're going to get the purists who say, okay, the Geophagus Tapajos is a South American fish. Don't mix them with the Africans. And to a certain extent, in this mix, I kind of agree with that. In some mixes, not as much. Multi-Take Addiction, thank you for your super chat. I'm going to get to that question in a second. I would highly recommend, if you're going to do, I think you said the yellow labs and the rusties, I would probably just leave that as an Mbuna tank. Mbuna in particular, even though you're going with Mbuna that are less aggressive, the fact that Geophagus Tapajos isn't going to be able to communicate well with those Africans, especially the Mbuna, if that fish can't color down to show that it is subdominant, it might have some issues in that tank, even in a 75. So if it were me, and you can try it, we have successfully mixed some South Americans and some African cichlids together. Again, I know the purists out there that makes their head explode, but with the Mbuna, I don't like to try to add non-Mbuna to those tanks. I don't have a lot of good luck with that. So Multi-Tank Addiction. Thank you for the super chat.
And Michael, no, we do not have the goldfish anymore. We did. Yeah.
That's one of my regrets.
Video. It was in the first video that you just put a tab up.
Yeah. The goldfish were just feeder fish. They were 39-cent feeder fish, and we had them in a 40-gallon breeder for a while, and they were getting bigger. And I'm like, I wanted to do the right thing with the fish, right? I knew at that time I didn't have an open 75, which is where they really needed to be after that, and really a 125 after that. So I had a friend who had a pond, and I'm like, hey, do you want these things? And they took them, and I think the last time I talked to them, it was last summer, not this past summer, the one before, they still had them. So, but they were really great fish, and I've thought about setting up another one because that was really cool. So Multi-Tank Addiction. Did their fish for Angel, Severum, and an Oscar in a 500-gallon. That's really cool. Obviously, the Angels and the Severum are not going to be the issue with the ditherfish, right? It's the Oscar, because that Oscar is going to eat anything that will fit into its mouth. The way to avoid that as best you can, obviously, is to feed that Oscar well. And so we've had Oscars that allowed Peacock fry to survive in the tank. In fact, for a while, people probably thought I was crazy, but our 125 was one of our best breeding tanks, right? When we came to the OBs and stuff, they were breeding in there, and like a bunch of them were surviving because the Oscar would come up to the top, and I'd be feeding him food sticks and all this stuff, and frozen bloodworms. He's like, I'm full. I'm not chasing those fish. It's not worth it. So we need to come up with fish that are going to stay out of the Oscar's mouth, and we want some dither fish. We need something big. 500 gallons is a great tank. So we're going to have some competing issues right now. The issues are we've got angelfish and severums, which don't tend to be very active. And the Oscars, even full grown, they're not super active either. So we've got to find fish that are going to be big enough not to fit in the Oscar's mouth, but yet not super active either. The first thing that comes to mind would be silver dollars, because most of the time, once they settle in, as when they get full grown, they're not as active as when they're younger. And as long as you're not startling them a lot, and I don't think you will because you are an experienced fish keeper, I think that could work. Silver dollars. I started to think about the tinfoils and ballast sharks. My issue there is going to be they're probably going to be too active for your angelfish. I know that when I had that mix in the 150, it was obviously a much smaller tank. They those fish, because they move around so much, did stress them out. So I like the silver dollars. I think I just had one too. Maybe if you had full-grown rainbow fish, and I mean full-grown, like the big boys, that might work. You might get an opportunistic Oscar who might be like, hey, that rainbow over there is not paying attention. Gulp, So that potentially could work, but you want at least, I would say, Denison barbs. That would be another one. So like the roseline sharks, again, full-grown, right? Not small ones. That could be a really cool fish that don't tend to be like crazy overactive too. So those are just some suggestions that come off the top of my head.
Scroll down.
I'm scrolling. All right.
Scroll down.
I'm scrolling. Oh, EJ.
Thanks, EJ Fishes.
Thank you, man. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Okay, let's see here.
And somebody requested a recent or a current fish room tour. I would agree with that.
Yeah, so we did the Nano fish room tour this week. So usually what I do is I try to do it once a year. And lately, the last couple of years, that has been happening on sometime in January. So I've actually got some tanks that are going to be getting some upgrades. And so what I'd like to do is get those upgrades in and probably show those off in the next few weeks maybe. We've got at least 3 or 4 tanks that are going to be completely torn apart and rescaped, which I think is going to be cool. And then we will probably do a fish room tour. Look for that, I'm hoping, in the early part of January. So that is the plan. Just because if I do it too often, there's a good side and a bad side to what we do. I don't generally get rid of fish, right? So it's like once the fish are in my fish room, there are pets. I try not to turn over fish just for the sake of turning over fish. To be like, oh, look what I got, look what I got, look what I got. The downside of that is when I do a fish room tour, if I did it like, I used to do them like once a quarter, like once every 3 or 4 months, and people are like, oh, all right, well, that was pretty much the same thing I saw 3 months ago. Great, the fish are a little bigger, plants grew a little taller. So sometime in January, I think, will be when that happens. Abraham, thank you so much.
Thank you, Abraham Lincoln.
How many Tapajos should I keep in a 75-gallon ideal tank mates, looking to have a schooling group and maybe a couple other fish alongside the Tapajos? So again, the thing is going to be whether or not you want to breed them, right? And what do you do when you get a pair? Because you undoubtedly, if you keep at least a male and a female, they're most likely going to pair up. So we've got 4 in a 55. I don't think that's ideal, if I'm being honest. We have the only thing that's keeping that from being a disaster, I think, is we've got 1 male and 3 females. So the pair, at least for the ones that we've always had, we've had that and we've had pairs in the past, they've paired and they've stayed a pair for years. So that bond has not broken. And the other 2, they have one side of the tank, and the other 2 females generally stay on the other side of the 55. So when it comes to your 75, it's the same 4-foot length. The extra width isn't going to solve that issue. So could you start out with 4 to 6 and then get a pair and then scale that back? Possibly. So you also have to think then, right, if I do get that pair and they start to breed and they start to protect that area, what kind of fish are going to be okay with that? So they generally don't chase other fish around, at least in my experience, other non-cichlids. So if you've got something maybe the size of an emperor, like an emperor tetra, or maybe like the smaller rainbows.
Buenos Aires.
Well, Buenos Aires size, but not the Buenos Aires. I don't like that mix only because they're fin nippers and you want your Tapajos to have those really awesome fins.
Probably.
So again, we're looking at fish that at least are probably 2.5 to 3 inches. And the Geophagos, Tapajos, like I said, generally, in my opinion, they don't really eat a lot of other fish. So I like to keep bristlenose plecos in my tanks, which is why I don't get a lot of fry, because they eat the eggs before I can get them out. You could potentially do, in a tank that size, maybe cory cats. I've done that before and they've left them alone. If you're looking for a hatchet fish, would certainly work in a tank like that. What else? Anything that would be more schooling type of fish. I mean, you could always do something like a giant Danio or something like that, but about that size. Like I said, the rainbows. I like the rainbows. I think they're pretty cool. Hold on, I saw.
There's a super chat from Critter Mom.
I saw Critter Mom. Thank you so much.
Oh, she had a question. Her tiger.
Yeah, I can read this because it's illuminated a little bit easier. So
there you go.
Watch this. Watch my reading ability and my ability to see. My tiger Oscar lost all his orange and is now just black. Does this mean something is wrong with him? is he eating? I guess would be, so when I'm trying to figure out if something is wrong with a fish, sometimes it does mean that, right? Sometimes when your fish loses color, there can be something wrong. And what I'm looking for there is, okay, he changed colors. Is something else going on? So did I change the background of my tank? Did I redo the substrate to a darker color, which would muddy them up a little bit, but not a lot, not with a tiger Oscar necessarily. Is there another fish in the tank that is more dominant? And so now your tiger Oscar's like, oh, I just want to be left alone. I'm going to try to mute myself as much as a tiger Oscar can. Is the fish still eating? And so if they're still eating, if they're still active, and the color has changed, and so I have something similar going on in my 150, my red shoulder severum, which I did a video on, when I did the species profile, when I did that video, he was gorgeous. He had red and blue, and he looked absolutely fantastic. I was so proud of him when I shot that video. Now, he's almost jet black. And the reason for that, the reason why he turned jet black is there is a female gold severum in there. And I think that is his way. That's his way of showing dominance. He's like the man now in that tank. And I've noticed that they've been spending a lot of time together, and they didn't used to do that. So you're looking for, when it comes to that, first and foremost is, I want to know if he's eating. Is his fish ickies, I'm going to use that one again.
Oh boy,
is the fish ickies coming out and it looks okay? It's not stringy. It's not white fish poop. Are there other fish picking on him? And obviously water parameters are so easy to check. So you're looking for ammonia, nitrite. Are my nitrates okay? And then if all of that's okay and he's eating, then as long as he's looking healthy, it might be okay. So, all right.
Ivan, ask your question again.
Okay.
I'm trying to find it. I can't see it.
And we'll take like maybe a few more questions because I know we're getting past the hour there.
Oh, it's after 9 already?
Yeah, I know. This goes by really fast. It's fun stuff. Okay, hold on. Let's see here. Ryan, anyone here knows why one of my cardinal tetra lost an eye? They were fine when I first got them. Doesn't seem to be the tank mates, as my betta is very calm and non-aggressive. It could be the other cardinals. So if the eye is completely gone, and I know this is like what fish keepers talk about, right? It's like a totally normal conversation. If the eye is completely gone, chances are either somebody ate it, picked on it, or it maybe got some kind of an injury. If it got cloudy first and got an infection, and then that caused the eye to have an issue, that's a different story. But cardinal tetras, tetras in general, they have their own dynamic in a group, and sometimes they can be a little bit snippy with one another. So could be a reason. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Appreciate it for the super chat.
Okay. Ivan has his question.
Okay. Ivan, I can't. So the one where I have 14 African cichlids in my 55 gallon. There are 3 or 4 inches at the moment. How many do you recommend me having? So 14 African cichlids in a 55 gallon. I think the next question would probably be, what type of African cichlids? So are they peacocks? Are they Mbuna? Are they Lake Tanganyikan? Because all of that is going to play a role. If they're Mbuna, that 14 to 20 is probably about max that you're going to get if they're all on the smaller Mbuna, not like the bumblebees. If they're peacocks, you're probably at the limit right now. And you may actually have to thin that out a little bit and try to figure out the dynamics, because some of those fish can get larger, maybe 4, 5, 6 inches, depending on what types of peacocks you have.
Jamie says it's 3 a.m. Are you in England by chance?
It sounds kind of like that would be the region, right?
Maybe.
Hardeep, would you guys into saltwater? So saltwater situation is, I'm not ruling it out. I just don't have the time to really deal with that right now, and I've never kept saltwater before, so it'd be kind of a learning curve. Maybe at some point. It's just not something I've done yet, but I do like it. I love the fish. I think they're awesome. Okay, Ivan said they are peacocks. Yeah, so
Scotland. Whoa,
that's cool.
So cool.
Ivan said they are peacocks. Yeah, I would probably stay with that, because they're, depending on the peacocks you've got, they could get pretty large. All right, so Mr. Bildo, is that right? B-I-L?
Yes, Mr. Bildo.
How do I set up my filtration for plants? Established tank with fish, added a scarlet temple and easy planter. Yeah, those easy planters are cool because that helps keep the stuff in the substrate. So the filtration for the plants, I would just make, so your plants really don't necessarily need the filtration. The water flow for sure. So the filter is going to provide that. But if it's for the plants, I would just make sure that you don't have so much water flow that it's uprooting the plants or causing them stress. But other than that, it really doesn't matter. The other thing too is people sometimes ask about carbon. Traditionally, carbon, a lot of people think that the carbon will pull the fertilizers out of the water. I've kind of changed my views on that a little bit because I've read some more recent scientific studies that show that it probably isn't happening as much as we think it is. But again, I don't use carbon anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Marty wanted to know if we have discus in our future.
Ooh, discus in the future. I love discus. And when
so do I.
I've always liked them. I've had discus in the past before we met.
Yeah.
And what really kind of made me want them even more was when we went and did that tour of, what was that place?
It was near Milwaukee.
No. It was the place in
the
summer. Yeah. This is the conversation where I can't remember where I was.
The place by the.
It was in Missouri, by Branson.
Yeah. Bass Pro.
It's affiliated with Bass Pro Shops. Anyway, they have a 3,000 gallon discus tank in there.
Yeah.
I did that discus video. So I haven't had them in a long time. Would I get them again? Maybe. But I think the tank where they would need to go is in that 150, the 4-foot 150. That's really deep. So if we ever do, it's probably going to wind up there. Daniel, if I separate the babies from rams, will they become less aggressive towards the other fish in the tank? It might take a little while. If you remove the cichlid fry, it might take them a couple days to realize, oh, my fry are gone. The one thing you'll have to be careful of is it doesn't happen all the time, but every once in a while when you remove fry from a pair, they get really angry. And they tend to get angry at one another. And so they get confused. And so then I've seen cases in our own fish room where the male's like, what happened to my kids? And the next thing you know, the female, and the female might do that too, they start to fight. So that's the only thing you have to be aware of. It doesn't always happen. In fact, most of the time it hasn't, but that is something to think about. Okay, let's see here.
First time community cichlids.
First time community cichlids. The less aggressive ones. The cichlids that I like, and it depends on the size of the fish, the size of the tank. And we actually did a video, I think it was 9 community cichlids that are great for beginners or something like that. The crib, your standard ones. That's why they're so popular. And by the way, cribensis are amazingly pretty fish when you get males and females, especially when they start to show off all that purple and red. And like the taeniatus are really awesome. So cribs, rams, both the Bolivian and the German blues and all the derivatives there.
Love them.
Let's see, what else? The curviceps cichlids, the keyhole cichlids are really good options. I had pretty good luck with the sahikas in a semi-community setting. Electric blue acara on the larger side. Angelfish are technically cichlids. It just depends on your setup. So all of those are decent. I'm trying to there's like a million of them, when I really start to think about them. But those are some that are really good for a potential community as long as you've got the right size tank. And yeah. All right, let's do 2 more questions, and then we'll let everybody get to their evening here. So let's see here. Go back up.
Something about Missouri.
Hold on. So Wayne asked, can you suggest a good tank mate 25 plus shoal of tiger barbs? Good tank mates for tiger barbs. It depends, again, on the size of the tank. I think, obviously, the tiger barbs, I think they're pretty aggressive. They can be fin nippy with one another and with other fish. So we want to just stay away from longer finned fish. Like angels would be a bad idea. I think most of your Geophagus, they're going to lose those really cool trailers if you tried to keep them with the tiger barbs. If I were keeping 25 tiger barbs, I think some of your standard, if you're looking for like a centerpiece fish, and I'm assuming that's kind of where we're headed with this, you could potentially do like maybe the more aggressive, like Geophagus brasiliensis comes to mind. Some of the like maybe firemouth cichlids might come to mind. Some of these fish that are kind of hold their own, like most of the Therichthes genus, which includes the firemouths, might be a good mix for them. What else? I'm just blanking now. I'm blanking on all the fish. Could the Acara work? Possibly. They might work out okay. Electric blues, even the standards. tiger barbs. Gouramis. Your full size opalines, golds. If you're looking for a non-cichlid type of fish, that could work. If you've got a really large tank and you want to start doing tinfoil barbs, ballast sharks, that would probably work too. If it's smaller, then I would stay with the smaller ones. All right, let's do one more. One more question. Let's see here. Do we have something? Let's see here. Trying to find one last one. Oh, okay. Here, Tyler's got one. Will a full-grown half-beak eat a full-grown guppy? Probably not. I mean, the half-beaks they're a little bit longer, but they're not particularly aggressive. They might eat fry, but then I don't think they would eat. First of all, the guppies are going to be a little bit quicker. The half-beaks really love to be at the top of the tank. So the guppies, while they go to the top of the tank, especially around feeding time, I don't think they're going to spend enough time there. And they're fast enough and active enough where the half-beaks probably, convicts for the tiger barbs too. I don't think you're going to have too big of a problem. All right, last question, I promise. What do I need to do different for my multi-fasciatus 40-gallon breeder, for my Caudal-Punk 40 breeder, both species-specific tanks looking to breed? A time. Make sure that they're proper size. So you got to have, that males should be 1.25 inches, female probably 1 inch. Let them get comfortable. Like I said last week with the shellies, I typically don't expect a lot of breeding, even from my full-grown shell dwellers, for at least 4 to 6 weeks. If it's been longer than that, if you're giving them the water they need to. I mean, obviously the water parameters, hard water, usually above 10 parts or 10 degrees or 170 to 200 parts per million or greater for your KH and GH. pH is around 8 to 8.4. Temperature is around 78. Give them plenty of shells for your multis. Rock works really well for your caudal punks, and then shells for the babies. Sometimes they like to go in there, and then just give them some time. Live baby brine. I absolutely am a big believer in feeding that out at least once a day. I really think the nutrients in that live baby brine helps them get the nutrients they need to help them want to breed. If you don't have that, even chopped up frozen bloodworms could work as well. So that would be my thing. That's what I would suggest. So Caveman Kenny, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. All right, everybody. We are going to call it a night, I think, and we will definitely reconvene next week. Really appreciate you being here, and hopefully you felt the filtration discussion was worthwhile. And so, yeah, thanks again, and we will see you soon. Thank you so much for everybody who became members and the super chats and all that stuff. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.
Have a good week.
See you guys. Bye.